So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good morning. So this is a time of year where we do a lot of eating, and then we do a lot of self-criticism because of the amount of eating we've done. It made me think of the time that I was standing in Florence, looking up at the statue of Michelangelo, the statue of King David, actually David at the time, that Michelangelo had done. And it got me to thinking that Michelangelo has done a lot of damage to a lot of people's sense of self and sense of what their proportions are supposed to look like. I certainly was looking up at Michelangelo and Michelangelo's statue of David and realized that there are two critical sculpting mistakes that Michelangelo had created and therefore caused tremendous pain and anguish in this world. The first, of course, is his statue of Moses with horns, which gave everybody the belief that Jews had horns. And then looking at the statue of David, I recognized that he gave a lot of men a sense of incredible insecurity. Certainly looking at David. But I noted that the guide had pointed out to us while we were standing there looking at this magnificent statue that he was disproportionate. The reason was that he was supposed to be mounted atop of a building, and from a distance his proportions would have looked strange if they were anatomically correct. And so on purpose, Michelangelo made his hands much larger. Of course, Michelangelo completely missed the point of what David was supposed to actually be about at that point in the story of David and Goliath. See, David was supposed to be, according to our tradition, actually quite small and not muscular at all. In fact, the tradition teaches us that King David was chosen because of his diminutive stature. The text teaches us quite clearly. Vayomer Adonai el Shmuel, God said to Shmuel, Al tabet al mer'ehu ve'al gavoha komato. Don't look at his size. Don't look at his lack of strength, says the text. God says to Shmuel, don't choose David because you see in him a great warrior. Ki lo asher yireh hadam ki ha'adam yireh le'enayim. Because people look at each other not the way God looks at people. Vadonai yireh lalev. God looks at people's hearts. God doesn't see their size. And in fact, the miraculous nature of David's defeat over Goliath comes from the fact that he was so small. Had he been the David that Michelangelo pictures for us in that statue, then it wouldn't have been so surprising that he could defeat Goliath. The text goes on to say how David put on Saul's armor and it was too big on him. To teach us it's not about the size of the man, it's about the size of a person's heart that matters most. And the text reminds us that's what God looks at. Human beings are only obsessed with our outer appearance. God is obsessed with our insides. I was surprised to learn in watching this TV show called The Crown that Princess Diana suffered from a horrible eating disorder. She was so beautiful to the outside world, inside and out. She embraced the stranger and the downtrodden, but inside was a tumultuous person. Inside was a person who didn't really love themselves and did terrible damage to herself. The rabbis say, Talmid Chacham, she'ein tocho kivaro eino Talmid Chacham. A righteous person who claims to be righteous a scholarly person who claims to be scholarly, but whose insides don't match their outsides, is not what they say they are. If our outward expressions don't mimic our inner personalities, then we're not who we say we are, says the Talmud. How great would it be if we could each match our outsides to our insides? 9% of the American population, 28 million people over the course of their lifetime, will be diagnosed with an eating disorder. 28 million people whose insides don't match their outsides, who feel differently about who they are on the inside than they're forced to express themselves on the outside. So God reminds Shmuel, don't look at the outside, look at the inside. And that's why there is one sentence in this morning's parsha that is bothering me so terribly. And it's not the first time we've heard of it in the Torah, and it's not the last time we're going to hear from it in the Torah. It says, Vayehi ka'asher ra'a Yaakov et Rachel, when Jacob saw Rachel, he fell in love. Not because of any action she did, but because of what she looked like. She fell in love, reminiscent of Yitzchak falling in love with Rebekah before he had heard one word of her kindness. It's reminiscent of the fact that Esther was chosen by her uncle Mordechai to save the Jewish people on Purim because of what she looked like. In a world in which beauty is seen only by what you look like on the outside, King Ahasuerus is our villain, because that's all he saw. So when Jacob saw Rachel, he fell in love. And then the text goes on, as if we didn't get it already. The text goes on, Ve'enei le'ah rakot v'rachel hayta yefat toar v'yefat mareh. That Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel, she was a beauty. Beautiful to look at, shapely and beautiful, says the text. It's so bothersome to me that our rabbis could be so shallow, that our ancestors could only be concerned with that. And that's why I was struck so deeply by the comment of the Kedushat Levi. The Berdichev Levi, the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, he says the following. At first glance, it's surprising that the Torah appears to link Yaakov's falling in love with Rachel in that verse, Ve'yahav Yaakov et Rachel, that Jacob loved Rachel, to the description of her physical beauty. Is it possible, says the Kedushat Levi, is it possible that Yaakov, the most admired of all of our patriarchs, was attracted to her physical beauty? And that's why he teaches in the name of his teacher, the Maggid of Mezrich. There was a spark to her. There was something beyond the physical beauty, something indiscernible, something beyond physical beauty. He saw a spark in her. And then the real kicker from this morning's parsha is what we read about this morning when Jacob and Lavan decide to pick animals that they want for themselves based on spots and speckles and stripes and plain colors. Because the text is teaching us by dramatic comparison, we pick animals by what they look like. We ought not pick people by what they look like. You see, animals are judged by appearance. People ought not to be. People should be judged by their character and by their gifts and by their talents and by their inner beauty. I had the opportunity this week of trying to develop this sermon, and I was able to develop a correspondence with Avinoam Sharon, who is the editor-in-chief of the Israeli Supreme Court project, the project of the Cardozo School of Law. And he wrote to me as follows: maybe Jacob was just shallow. Maybe we don't need to explore it any further. Maybe we don't need to justify his being drawn to an exceptionally beautiful woman. Perhaps Jacob was a little shallow and very susceptible to externalities, he says. On another level, though, he goes on further and he says, maybe we should consider the words that are used. And he points out the fact that the description of Rachel is the same description of Joseph. The same words that are used. Maybe his attraction to Joseph later in life was because he saw something that looked like his mother. But still, it's all about looks. And I can't let it go because I believe we have to be more understanding. We have to be more insightful. We have to be better. We have to be kinder. We have to be less like the superficial Jacob and look deep into people for who they are. This week we had this great opportunity to read a book together in our book club. It was written by a woman named Abby Stein. The book was called Becoming Eve. It's a story of a young man raised in a Hasidic community who becomes a rabbi. And then she realizes that's not her truth. Abby felt at a certain age that she was a girl. She suppressed her desire for a new body while looking for answers wherever she could find them, from forbidden religious texts to smuggled secular examinations of faith. Finally, she orchestrated a personal exodus from ultra-Orthodox manhood to mainstream femininity. A radical choice that forced her to leave her home, her family, her way of life. Can you imagine? Just because she needed to express who she was, who her truth was, how much she had to give up. It was an incredibly moving personal account which made for a deep and meaningful conversation in our book club. Make no mistake about it, this is a life and death issue. Coincidentally, maybe or maybe not, I had the privilege of watching this week a talk by someone named Alok, who is a gender non-conforming writer and performance artist. And near the end of Alok's talk, they told this story. I remember Stephanie Yellowhair, a Native American trans woman who, after being mocked by the police for her clothes and makeup, she looked them straight in the eye and said, "Excuse my beauty. Excuse my beauty." Beauty is about being yourself, a fierce commitment to individuality, even in the face of political and social repression. Look, at very least, I pray we no longer add to that repression and begin the process of healing all the damage we have done and we have contributed to by forcing people into neat boxes. I pray that we're able to utilize our resources and our conviction to stand side by side, shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand with people who feel marginalized. May we begin now to see people for who they want to be seen rather than what is convenient for us. In 2017, a group of college students in Brussels did a little experiment. They went around recording people and then then told them they were beautiful. And they watched the reaction on the people's faces. Their responses were, for the most part, surprise that someone would consider them beautiful. And then they would all smile. Would that we could give that to each other, a sense of understanding every individual's beauty, because we see people for who they are, not for what society has said they have to be. So, I say this, until we figure out how to solve the problem of body language and body image, at least you should be able to tell someone they're beautiful. Shabbat Shalom. Yeah. We continue with Musaf, page 184, Chatzi Kaddish. Please rise.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבו,
אמן.
ועמד יברח חירותי, וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכו בית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבו מבורך, לעולם
לעולמי עולמיו יתברך.
יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל